Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I'm going to provide a quick review of the technology. We have set up this meeting as a webinar, which allows us to host meetings with a larger audience. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the link will be available after today's session. We also invite your questions. Please look at the Q&A box on your screen. If you think of a question, you can type it in there. We are planning to create an FAQ at the end of the series that addresses questions. If you are having any issues with the Zoom technology, please feel free to either chat with me in Zoom or reach out via email, which I'm dropping in the chat. Thank you.
Good evening, and welcome to Africatown and the future of Mobile, Alabama. My name is Levy D. King III, and I humbly serve as board chairman for the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation. A word about the purpose and the design of the series and tonight's presentation. Primarily, its purpose is to educate all viewers. The method of the series is to lead all participants to ask themselves questions rather than telling them what they should actually think. Secondly, its purpose is to engage all Africatown residents and interested persons, both near and far, and organizations in seeking answers that make sense to them personally. Finally, the series seeks to encourage residents of Mobile to speak across historic lines of separation, fear, and importantly, misinformation about its future, one that works for all interested parties. Tonight's presentation will focus on land ownership. It is the fourth of a 7-part series of educational workshops commissioned by the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation. The Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation, or as we call it, AHPF, has commissioned the Justice and Sustainability Associates, to document the stories of historical Africatown and create cultural and economic transformation through education and partnerships that benefit both the environment and mankind. Justice and Sustainability Associates is an alternative dispute resolution firm that uses consensus building, facilitation, and civic engagement to achieve sustainable community development, environmental justice, and smart growth. The purpose of this series is to introduce all residents and participants and interested persons to information, perspectives, and options which are relevant to developing both a shared vision for the future of Mobile and neighborhoods like Africatown, as well as a mission that uplifts current and future residents of Mobile and also neighborhoods specifically like Africatown. It's about building capacity to support the community to make informed decisions about its own future. The slides outline the schedule for the rest of the program. Next week, we have the pleasure to dive into the topic of demographics, looking at the patterns and trends of the population characteristics specifically in Africatown. The following week, we will explore ways to facilitate collaboration and agreement among diverse stakeholders through community partnerships. We hope that you will tune in and also please invite people you know each and every week through the end of June. I now like to introduce and also have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Don Edwards, from Justice and Sustainability Associates, who tonight has the wonderful pleasure of being tonight's narrator.
As you look at this image, we want to ask you to imagine what it conveys to you about rights, the authorities of ownership, and how power accrues to owners of land, and how it grows as more land is acquired. So we want to start by asking you, do you know who owns the majority of what we call Africatown today? And what is your sense of how the ownership patterns have changed over the years? How do you imagine the land is owned? Is it owned by individuals, organizations, or companies that have shaped the Africatown that exists today? And do you believe that they are exercising their responsibilities, their authority, their rights in ways that have benefited or harmed Africatown? In tonight's workshop, we will investigate the importance of land ownership within a community. We'll think about how Africatown's ownership pattern has changed and evolved over the years. And we'll raise questions that encourage you to ask about the political and social tools that you can use to create the change and the Africatown you want. Africatown is a community that came into existence and has persevered and thrived through the hard work and resiliency of its residents. From building their own homes, creating schools and churches, local businesses, and other examples of meeting their needs, the residents created a community where they could live and work and play and prosper. Throughout its history, Africatown has shifted as ownership has shifted. And so Africatown is a community that came to be an example of how over history, over time, we can imagine not what it is today, but what we would like it to be. And so we want to talk about different concepts that tonight increase our understanding of the options available to the residents of Africatown. When thinking about the concept of land ownership and how we use land, please think about the following questions that you see on this slide. What do you consider valuable about land? How do you assign value? What does the value of the land in Africatown mean to you? How do you think land ownership can affect the affordability and the availability of housing in a community like Africatown? Do you believe that there is sufficient housing, for instance, in this community? Why or why not? As residents, The land in Africatown has meaning. What does it mean to you, and what do you want it to mean to you in the future? And so, as we have asked earlier, what comes to mind when you think of Africatown? Is it the roads, the streets, the houses, the buildings? Is it the people? Is it all of the above? We'd like you to take a minute and to answer these two questions that you see here and any others, and put those in the chat so that we can begin to think about what land ownership is and what it could be. I see that some folks are putting comments in the chat. Thank you for doing that. Please continue to do that as we continue to examine this question of land ownership. When you own land or property, what are your responsibilities as well as your privileges as an owner? Who decides what those responsibilities and privileges are? So let's understand that land ownership refers to an individual or an entity's right and responsibility for a piece of land. It signifies control, possession, and use of land within boundaries defined by property laws. Landowners have legal protection against unauthorized use, trespassing, or infringement on their property rights. Land ownership also includes various responsibilities. Owners are typically responsible for maintaining and preserving the land, complying with relevant regulations and zoning restrictions, paying property taxes, and ensuring the land's usage aligns with local laws and regulations. So what are some of the benefits of owning land? And what kind of power, responsibility, authority does it create? Likewise, what are some of the challenges of land ownership? What do landowners experience? Do you believe that land ownership is equally accessible to everyone who wants to be an owner in Africatown? Why? Is it so or not? Who do you understand determines accessibility? And are you aware of publicly available resources that support and sustain home ownership? Or have some of you used them? Again, we'd love to hear your comments about some of these questions. Now, before we dive into property ownership and how it has changed and how these changes have influenced and created the Africatown of today, it's also important to learn about collective ownership, land owned by a community or a neighborhood. Imagine a community owned solely by the people who live in it. What do you think that type of community ownership would look like? What would it mean? What kind of businesses could there be? What would be the quality of schools or the hospitals or the grocery stores in that neighborhood? What would it feel like to live in a community owned by the people who live in it? As you reflect on these questions and share your responses in the chat, consider that communities are shaped by those who own them, who own the land. The residents of a neighborhood have a vested interest in improving and maintaining the environment that they live in. Residents who are landowners tend to invest in their neighborhoods to achieve their ideal of the community they want and to leverage their rights as owners to maintain it to satisfy their desires. So now let's talk about collective ownership. Collective community ownership is ownership of land and property that is held by all members of a group. When thinking of collective community ownership, there are various forms that it can take, and there are different ways that communities can benefit. There are models, and we want to talk about those models now. There are community land trusts, which are community-based nonprofits governed by residents and public representatives that provide lasting community assets and shared equity home ownership opportunities for families and individuals. There are cooperatives, which are businesses or other organizations owned and run jointly by the members of the cooperative. And those members can share the benefits and rewards of ownership. Community gardens are another model. Community gardens are land gardened, cultivated by a group of people, individually or collectively, who agree to abide by certain ways of preserving and using the land to the benefit of all. Farm collectives. These are farms or a group of farms that member owners jointly farm and own as a collective. Community-owned stores can be locally owned and democratically run to meet the needs of the community they are in. And then there are neighborhood real estate investments, or REITs. These are corporations or companies that help residents and investors invest in large-scale, income-producing real estate that serves communities, like shopping centers or apartment buildings. So which, if any of these models might be a good fit and something that the residents of Africatown might agree to aspire towards? And if there are other models that you have in mind or questions, please take a second and put those thoughts into the chat. So let's take a moment to imagine what it would take to create the Africa town of your dreams and your vision, and the neighborhood characteristics you'd like Africa town to have. We touched upon these in previous workshops. Tonight, let's take a moment to think about the current context. In many communities, Africa town included, public and private land represent opportunities for actors external to the community as well as internal to the community to represent or misrepresent to whoever's listening what the priorities are of the community. Public land refers to areas of land that are managed by the government for the benefit of the public. This can take the shape of public libraries, recreational centers, environmental protection. However, when faced with the need to increase economic activity, the government can lease land to private companies. Now, privately owned commercial or industrial land is largely driven by a need to make profits. It can also, however, be used for developing housing, parking structures, hotels, or restaurants. What does a community that is owned primarily by private business or individuals who do not reside in the community look like? What do you think it feels like to live in such a community? What amenities are offered? What are the options for healthcare, groceries, banking services? What does housing look like in such a community? How often is it affordable? As we have mentioned so far, communities are ultimately shaped by the priorities of those who own the land they exist in. So what would you expect the top priorities of different groups of property owners to be, public or private, individual or corporate? And how would you expect priorities to impact residents of Africa town? And would you want to see those interests and priorities reconciled with yours? And then finally, can they always be reconciled? Though private entities and local governments can assist in enhancing and building community ownership, there are also examples throughout history where businesses and public agencies have also diminished ownership within communities. Just as it's important to be aware of the opportunities and resources that help increase home ownership, it is important to know when and why home ownership ends up being decreased. A primary way that land is historically acquired by local entities, governmental, is through something called eminent domain. Eminent domain is the right of government actors to take private property for public use. In this image, which some of you will recognize, you see a resident of Africa town pointing to private land that was eminently domained and put into public use. So when that happens, government actors are required to justly compensate property owners. it is important to be aware that just compensation for property acquired through eminent domain is also, though, defined by the same government actors who implement it. Another way that land can be acquired is through regulatory takings. This refers to when governments enact regulations that devalue or restrict the use of private property without physically taking it. This can include zoning restrictions, environmental regulations, or historic preservation laws that limit an owner's ability to use or change their property. While regulations for public interest can be legitimate, they also often overly burden property owners who are struggling under many different kinds of pressures. And these are only two examples of mechanisms by which land ownership can be transferred to the public sector. On this slide, you can see Mobile County's Revenue Commission's interactive tax map. This provides information about the owners of each individual parcel of land within Mobile. How many of you knew that such a resource existed, and do you know how to use it? According to the 2016 Africatown Neighborhood Plan, more than 50% of Africatown is used for industrial activity, while only 10% is used for housing. This map is one of the many tools available to community residents in order to help them understand who owns what in Africatown. As residents of the city of Mobile and members of the Africatown community, it is important to be aware of how property is owned and managed, and when and where property ownership is being acquired. Why is it important to understand these things? It's because, simply put, there is power in property ownership. Though local governments largely decide the city's makeup, zoning regulations, and planning processes, they are guided and shaped by residents of communities who organize themselves to be heard. Beyond appearing at and voicing their concerns at public meetings, property owners have the right to appear before a zoning hearing board and to request changes in zoning regulations. So think about what is currently going on in and around Africatown. What new developments are being built? What's not being built? Are you aware of and engaged in the meetings and conversations about developments before they begin? Is your voice heard when these developments are planned or first raised as ideas or visions? And if you are a property owner living in Africatown today, are you leveraging your power efficiently and effectively? So let's talk about the loss of land ownership. Loss of land ownership carries with it potential consequences for a community. We will cover only a few of the most pressing. Firstly, environmental injustices are often experienced by people of color at higher rates. More than 1 million African Americans live within a half-mile of natural gas facilities and face a, quote, cancer risk above EPA's level of concern due to unclean air, and more than 6.7 million African Americans live in the 91 US counties with oil refineries. In total, African Americans are 75% more likely than whites to live in what are called sacrifice zones, which are areas near commercial facilities that produce noise, odor, traffic, or emissions that negatively affect nearby populations. A second potential consequence of a loss of community land ownership are food deserts. Food deserts can be defined as neighborhoods where residents have few to no convenient options for purchasing affordable and healthy foods, especially fresh fruits and vegetables. Food deserts often exist in areas where communities are relatively small, where there are a higher rate of vacant homes, and where residents have limited access to educational and employment opportunities. When we look ahead toward what Africatown can be, it is important to consider which path will be the most advantageous and accessible for the community. Land ownership can be a difficult process to navigate, but there are numerous proven ways to approach it. We have included a few of those successful processes for communities that are similar to Africatown. First, establishing community land trusts. A community land trust is a trust intentionally created that is based in a nonprofit organization, often led by community members, serving as a vehicle for collective community ownership. Then we want to talk about land banks. A land bank is a public entity which has unique governmental powers that focus on recovering dilapidated properties for community use. Land banks can cheaply acquire tax foreclosed properties, sell the properties flexibly, and also generate revenue for the land bank. And then there's also the advocacy for inclusionary housing. Inclusionary housing refers to a policy or practice that mandates or encourages the inclusion of affordable housing units whenever market race residential developments are planned. The purpose of inclusionary housing is to create mixed income communities by ensuring that a portion of the housing in each development is affordable to lower income individuals and families. By doing this, it creates diversity in new communities. This slide talks about buying back the block. There are many communities that have taken the avenues I just mentioned and are finding success using them. A primary example of that kind of community reclaiming and repurposing its land to serve its needs is the community of New Orleans in the state of Louisiana. Specifically in the 7th Ward, which has a population of approximately 12,000. The residents of that neighborhood chose to combat gentrification and the lack of affordable housing through collective participation in community land trusts. For context, the 7th Ward, like several areas in New Orleans and the greater Louisiana community, was severely impacted by Hurricane Katrina. Once vibrant commercial spaces were left vacant, community-owned properties blighted. Community members struggled to redevelop several parts of the area. And in the periods immediately after Katrina, it became clear that the goals and priorities of community members were not necessarily aligned with those of the government of New Orleans. The need to economically recover quickly incentivized the city to create opportunities for private investors to purchase large amounts of land within New Orleans. However, there were a few external funding opportunities to support Black business owners and homeowners, and this led to significantly decreased Black home ownership within the area. And this is what gave way to the waves of gentrification that came. At that time, the local Black population decreased by 20%. Aware of the lack of government support, the community investigated ways they could address socio and economic trends that they were suffering from and the impacts they were having in the 7th Ward. Assessing community resources and building consensus about their goals, community members came to the decision to develop a community land trust, namely the Crescent City Community Land Trust, CCCLT. That land trust has served to promote racial equity, proactive community stewardship, and permanently developed affordable commercial rental spaces. The collective of Black business owners and local community investors have been successful in developing housing opportunities across New Orleans. They have successfully created 69 permanently affordable apartments, including 25 affordable workforce apartments, and have even renovated an entire community of single-family homes where 90% of home buyers, not renters, home buyers are Black. Now, there are several lessons to be drawn from that community's success that may serve Africatown. Those that stand out are that, one, a community with residents who are aware of resources available to them and understand how they intend to use those resources is best prepared to achieve their goals. Further, in circumstances where local governments are not incentivized or incentivizing to provide assistance to the communities, there are still other opportunities and solutions that communities can discover and develop independently. So, we know that Africatown is unique and distinct from New Orleans, of course. It has its own challenges, goals, and available resources. What are the challenges that you believe Africatown is currently facing in terms of land ownership? Do you believe that your local officials and major property owners are acting and behaving in your interests or in your favor? What does Africatown currently need to overcome the challenges it faces? What does overcoming these challenges look like from the perspective of land ownership? Does it mean more locally owned businesses? Does it mean more community, collectively shared gardens or stores or businesses? Does it mean increased affordable housing opportunities? Does it mean less privately owned land? And that raises the question of what are the barriers that impede progress towards the kind of ownership that is going to serve the needs of the Africatown community. Are you knowledgeable about resources and opportunities available to your communities? The ones that will help you initiate processes, the ones that are readily available to your community? Are you aware of the allies, other entities who might assist? Do you believe that these resources could possibly create the outcomes you are hoping for in Africatown? So as we come to our conclusion tonight, we ask you to reflect on these questions. And again, please share your answers in the chat. The questions we would like you to consider as we close are: how can land ownership be influenced, can be leveraged to influence the development of the Africatown neighborhoods and community into the one you desire? And how can you overcome the barriers or challenges that are in the way of increasing your land ownership? We'd like you to put your comments, your answers, your considerations in the chat. And while you are doing that, we're going to summarize the comments we received last week. So here are examples of responses we got last week from you when we asked, how can you make sure that the development plans for Africatown build upon and enhance Africatown's strengths, assets, and neighborhood character? These are some of the responses you gave us. The community should create their own plans, then determine where they want the city to support. All that is needed is concrete plans that can be shared with potential funding partners. As we rebuild the homes or roof restoration to change the look of Africatown, we must also revive the hope of the people of the community. All plans need funding. We have to look outside of Mobile if the funds cannot be committed from within. So we're going to give you a few more seconds to comment further in the chat. Now, as we have done previously, since the start of this workshop series, over 50 individuals, actually closer to 70, have attended one or more sessions. And we have conducted a poll after each workshop to get an idea about who is attending. So these are the results from last week's poll of participants. Again, most of the people who attended live in another area of Mobile, not in Africatown, or in an area of the United States outside of Alabama. Most participants were above the age of 46, with most people being above the age of 60. As you consider and ponder the meaning of these results, we're going to launch a poll to help us understand who's attending tonight, how that attendance has changed, and to see who is participating. We are going to run the same poll with a few short questions as we've done previously. The poll is now launched, and you may need to scroll down to answer all 3 questions, but we hope you will do that. So now we will present the evaluation results from our seminar, our workshop last week. So here are the results. We received evaluation responses from 7 people. When asked to rank how well you think this presentation is improving your ability to build the community you desire on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 person said 3, 4 people said 4, and 2 people said 5. The link to this week's evaluation has just been dropped into the chat. And we would appreciate it if you take just a few minutes to complete that evaluation, as it will help us make sure that we are paying attention to what you've said and what you care about during the workshops that remain. As a reminder, we want to say that as a result, at the end of this series of workshops, we will be creating a frequently asked questions, or FAQ, that begin to address questions and comments of interest that have emerged from these workshops. Thank you for listening.
It is my pleasure to first thank Don and his team for the development, execution, and the delivery of another phenomenal session on this evening. Justice and Sustainability Associates, you guys are doing a phenomenal work, and I am sure that the board of directors of the foundation would agree with me when I say you guys were the best choice and a great decision as a commission organization to deliver these workshops and sessions to the Africatown community and all those who are participating and joining us each and every week. To learn more about the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation, I invite you to contact our organization by using the link on the screen. In addition to these workshops, it is my pleasure to share some of the news and notes, the events and happenings of the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation. We are doing the work with humility, with intent, and with locked-in focus to support, to educate the entire community of Africatown through the foundation. In addition to these workshops that we are providing to our residents and to our participants each week, we would like to call your attention to several of the other initiatives that we are providing as a foundation. First, we are providing the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation's 2023 Africatown Summer Swim Program. This program is a 6-week program that will introduce participants ages 5 to adult to the basics of swimming. And it will provide them those necessary skills to become strong, confident swimmers. Registration will be open until Friday, June the 23rd. You can contact us as a foundation for more information at africatownswim@gmail.com. africatownswim@gmail.com, or you can simply register using the link that has been placed in the chat as well. As you're probably aware, and I know that we're all excited, the Africatown Heritage House will open on July the 8th. The opening will feature an exhibition on the Clotilda and the 110 men, women, and children carried by this ship. Tickets will be available later in June, and the foundation will assist in ensuring that the information goes out to the entire community. Also, good news from the foundation. Our goal is to also provide tangible work, tangible contributions to the community of Africatown. On behalf of the board of directors, I'm excited to share the foundation has provided roof repairs for over 12 resident homes in Africatown. We are excited to contribute in this way, and we are working to consistently and continuously contribute even more tangible productions and outcomes to the community. We do want to thank Commissioner Ludgood for her support in helping the foundation deliver to the residents of Africatown. Also, this coming Monday, we're excited as a foundation to host our community partners in Africatown. We'll be hosting 2 leaders of each organization of our community partners in Africatown as we come together to learn the focus and the directives and the goals and objectives of those organizations. This will allow us as a collective unit of various organizations in the community to understand our work even better as we work to uplift, to encourage, and to move forward the community of Africatown. And additionally, if you haven't gotten to it quite yet, the city of Mobile has a survey which they've opened to gather input on the design of the future Africatown Welcome Center. We will drop the link to this survey in the chat, and we encourage you to sign up for text notifications by texting Mobile Africatown WC, Mobile Africatown WC for Welcome Center, Mobile Africatown WC 2918. You can text to this number 91896. 91896. Also, for those of you who are attending with us each week, and those of you who are new, we invite you, and we courteously and cordially, with empathy and love, we ask you to invite all those who you think will benefit from learning and hearing and being a part of this information to the next workshop next week, and also for the remainder of the entire series. Please invite them to RSVP by emailing info@meetviavideo.com. info@meetviavideo.com. via video.com or simply calling 251-216-1661. Again, 251-216-1661. Again, my name is Levy D. King III, and I humbly serve as the board chairman for the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation. On behalf of the entire board of directors and our organization, it is our pleasure to deliver these impactful educational sessions weekly, and we invite you to become a part of our movement as well. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you and those you invite. Bring your village with you next week to the next week's session. Have a good evening. Thank you for listening.